You're with Julian on the Brown Note and album review time. And the most commercially successful album so far this year, as he always has done, Abel Tesfaye from Canada as The Weeknd has the biggest opening selling album this year with Hurry Up Tomorrow. And The Weeknd is one of the most interesting and avant-garde and artistically interesting and competent and influential artists of the last 15 years in the realms of pop and R&B and even new wave to a degree. And the trilogy of albums that he's released, which I'll get into in a second, have been a masterclass. And he arrived from Canada out of nowhere. He was, I think his mum was from Ethiopia and fled conflict there. At a time when rap and R&B was really quite poor. The first half of the century, the first decade of the century, the urban R&B and Jay-Z bling era I hated. And it was only towards the end of that decade that things really shifted. And he was one of the most important elements to that. And so were the Odd Future gang people that brought, in his case, in The Weeknd's case, a real darkness, a bleakness, trashiness, bleary-eyed, drug come down, uncommercial vibe back to, the Usher era of R&B was replaced by this much more sort of neurotic and artistically interesting music. And he released 3 mixtapes, and I featured them on the radio back then around 2009, where he made an enormous name for himself just giving these 3 albums away, I think over the course of 1 year. And I did feature them heavily. I featured House of Balloons, which was one of my tracks of the year at the time, if not the track of that year. But really established himself in a way that Lana Del Rey did, because it wasn't immediately apparent that this was almost it is a character, that Abel Tesfaye is a character as The Weeknd. And he arrived almost fully formed, the same way that Lana Del Rey did, and the same way that Lana Del Rey really struggled with her first few studio albums to make that into a cohesive artistic statement as strong as how well it was defined on a track like Video Games, or for Abel Tesfaye as defined as it was on those mixtapes. Those early albums didn't really trigger anything, but they were very successful commercially. So Kissland in 2013, Beauty Behind the Madness in 2015, and Starboy in 2016, I couldn't care less about. And they were very successful, and he became one of the biggest stars on the planet. But after that, he suddenly became something else, in the same way that Lana did with NFR On. He became musically worthy of this entire endeavour, and has now confirmed that the trilogy has ended. And I don't think many people realise we were on that journey anyway, but After Hours, the best of the bunch, was a masterpiece. It was my album of the year on my show in 2020. Followed it up with Dawn FM, which was virtually not quite as good, but very nearly another fantastic album in 2022. And the final one, which is confirmed that those 3 albums are a trilogy, is Hurry Up Tomorrow, which has come out about 3 weeks ago. The symmetry of this project is, maybe it wasn't intended, I doubt it was intended, but it's beautiful. Those 3 mixtapes, the trilogy at the end. The last track on this album being the intro to the first track on the first mixtape that he released is quite special. The character The Weeknd is, this neon lit, cocaine soaked, desperate for validation, broken hearted, treats women like dirt, and is treated like dirt, and is desperate for love, and awake at 4 a.m, not neurotically tearing himself to pieces. It was a wonderful characterization, very much sort of at odds with this very together version of an R&B singer being a lover boy. Also the fact that he introduced a lot of new wave elements to his music, which made it incredibly palatable. But you know, his singing voice, production and melodies were absolutely top tier throughout this trilogy. This is by far the longest, 83 minutes. And I think that is a little bit to its detriment, but it's still a very fine release. I think there's a little bit in the way of too many cooks on this album at times. I don't really know much about Sage Schofield, and that's a producer that appears on virtually every track, but very, very impressed that Daniel Lopatin, also a Canadian, better known as One Tricks Point Never, another hugely influential and important artist from the last decade, is also on, as a producer on virtually every track. A very high quality opening run of tracks open this magnum octopus. And Justice, the French electro house duo, appear as producers, as does Johnny Jewel from Chromatic. Some really interesting people turn up on this album, but I do think too many people turn up. And it's a great track, Wake Me Up, with Justice, which is a little bit redolent of their own track Genesis, a masterpiece from the Cross album. But it does some of the things that the album does, which is there's a lot of very minimalist sort of keyboard back verse melodies, and a gothic feel as well, and a very dramatic opening in the same way that After Hours had a very dramatic opening as well. The introduction or interpolation of Thriller is absolutely magnificent. That Thriller, about halfway through the track, is fantastic, but it also made me think of the track Genesis by Justice, how close to Thriller that actually was. I'm not going to go through every track because there's so many. Cry For Me, another very strong track featuring Metro Booming on that one. It's got some great synth bars on it, and the production throughout is always immaculate. The track Sao Paulo, which was a single featuring Anitta, I think a Brazilian singer, has got this really sort of hard club pop vibe that you get off of something like Brat from Charlie XCX, or from Moto Mami from Rosalia. There's kind of like these fever dream lyrics throughout this whole thing, and Baptized in Fear is another one, which voices tell me that I should carry on, and he's talking about being almost trapped in a bathtub. There's a lot of very neurotic introspection going on this album. It's a one-piece sort of album, so that a lot of the tracks bleed into the next one, and Baptized in Fear sort of gives its back end over to the following track, Open Hearts, which is a masterpiece, an absolutely beautiful pop song. This incredible strobing bass through the verses, up there with whatever that massive hit he had off After Hours was, the longest running number one in the US history, I can't remember. Cover My Scars When I Open My Arms, followed by this like old school trance synth lines going on. If I put down my two favourite pop songs on the album, they both feature Max Martin, the pop producer extraordinaire, probably the pop producer with the most pop hits of the last 30 years would be Max Martin. And I was very surprised that the other track later on in the album was also Max Martin as well. And I feel like that track benefits from having so few people involved, but it's an absolutely outstanding track. Got this like the synth line that's going along with this sort of popping Seinfeld slap bass going on. Is absolutely magnificent. We do move through some less interesting tracks, and they also have some big name artists appearing as well. The track 9, Reflections, Laughing, with Travis Scott and Florence the Machine, who may as well not be on the track. I didn't really notice her on it. Acoustic ballad. It's got this ominous sort of sub bass, and Travis Scott on it as well. I like the phone call in the middle where the woman's voice sort of turns into a trans woman's voice, into a man's voice. I thought that was pretty cool before introducing Travis Scott. I thought that was really well done. But after that, we get a couple of, some middling sort of soul tracks, soul R&B tracks. Enjoy the Show featuring Future, I imagine, appeared on the album because it had a Future guest spot, and The Weeknd appeared on Future's album last year, which is one of the releases that caused all the fuss with Drake. Almost opens like a Freddie Gibbs Mad Lib track, the Chipmunk Soul going on, but it's fairly ordinary, it wouldn't be missed, and this is such a long album. I think one thing that I would take away negatively is that the album has some really good filler or in-between tracks that don't try and be big tracks. I'm sweating. I had to close the door and turn off the aircon to do this, to block out the noise. It is roasting in Sydney today. I'm dying. It's track 10, Enjoy the Show, is just an ordinary track, and it's followed by Give Up on Me, which is also another very ordinary track, and there's a little too many creeping in on such a long project. It's sort of like, I feel like compared to Dawn FM and After Hours, a little bit more of the air's been let out of this one. And that's not to say it isn't a very fine album, it's just comparing them to albums that were in my top 6 or 5 albums of the year. When do we get back? There's an uptick with I Can't Wait to Get There. I thought was very good. It's a gentle soul track and has some very paranoid lyrics. And it's got a more compelling melodies to those drifty sort of R&B soul tracks that followed it. Pharrell turns up on Timeless, which is a stronger track, and Playboy Carti is a bit more interesting, and they go straight in from the opening. And Pharrell makes himself heard, which is something that some of the other guest spots don't actually. I couldn't even tell. The lyrics here reminded me of the show, was it called The Idol, that crashed and burned last year, which was The Weeknd, and was it Lily Rose Depp or someone like that, about the Weeknd character and this LA nightclub culture of cocaine and starlets and people behaving terribly and feeling awful about it in the daylight hours afterwards. And I thought, tracks like Niagara Falls would be filler on Dawn FM and After Hours, and they're probably filler here, but they're a higher standard of filler, and when you've got this level of filler, you don't need those previous few tracks. You can probably delete them and have a stronger, more cohesive listen, which is it's 83 minutes. It's not a short album. Take Me Back to LA, where he reminisces about, how he misses the shit's whole life he had. A very compelling It's Okay for Me to Scream. The Big Sleep, interesting list of people on this track as well. So we actually get Giorgio Moroder. The legend Giorgio Moroder appears, and it's got a very sort of gothic synths, and sort of marching beat along to it. And 106 Point Never, who's on virtually, I think he's on every track, and the vocoder comes out as well, sort of making a bridge between The Weeknd and Random Access Memories, the Daft Punk album as well. And that bleeds into Give Me Mercy, which is again Max Martin involved. I assume it's Max Martin, it just says Martin, but the pop song itself is so brilliantly structured. It's magnificent. And the opening, Bruce Hornsby and arranged synths of outstanding production, is so well balanced. It's a fantastic track, almost a lilting pop cod reggae vibe to it, and then it gets very personal and introspective, which is interesting because the introspection before is sort of like a lot of it is about being out partying, love affairs, breaking apart, how bad you feel. But then it gets quite sort of more personal. The Abyss features the best guest spot on the whole album, and very inspiringly chosen, Lana Del Rey. She appears at the back end of that track and is fantastic. And the synths as well, they sort of gradually increase in tempo, and given the track's called The Abyss, it makes you feel like he's falling backwards, and the speed is growing. It's a definite high point. And the Red Terror, which seems to be lyrically about his mother fleeing war-torn Ethiopia, it's a very sort of personal part of the album. And then it sort of comes back, and he's mentioned Purple Rain, the movie by Prince, and the album by Prince. The ending references that, and it is a very sort of movie-esque final couple of tracks on there, Without a Warning, which is The Crowd Will Scream My Name, goes back to him being a star, and it's got the sort of trap beats. Superb percussion on that track, maybe my favourite on the album, and ironically the kind of trap beats that Lana Del Rey employed on a couple of tracks on Did You Know There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard, particularly the one towards the end, which featured a remix, and then the A&W track as well, American Horror track. And it ends on its most hopeful moment, which is Hurry Up Tomorrow, the title track, where he talks about how he's going to do better, how he knows how bad he is, how he has a missing father, and how much hope he has for tomorrow. Almost like Hurry Up Tomorrow isn't just escaping a dream, it's like, I will be better tomorrow. So overall, it's an incredibly complex and rewarding project, just brought down by a lack of compelling tracks at times over such a long project compared to Dawn FM or compared to After Hours, which was the pinnacle of these. So it's an incredible trilogy, an amazing run, and if you've got that first trilogy and the last trilogy, an incredible era of music. Who knows what will come next, but he's a hugely talented guy, a brilliant singer, beautiful falsetto. The inflections of new wave and synth, I even felt like the Human League was involved at one point, make for his music being far less just homogenized than most of the pop stars around him. He really doesn't care what anyone else is doing. He clearly sculpts albums with a great degree of care. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. I think I would have given Dawn FM an 8.5, and I would have given After Hours an 9 out of 10. So well done to The Weeknd for an incredible run of pop music and 3 albums. Adios.